Graves Foundation as well. So George Shirley is someone with deep connections to the Detroit area. He was born in Indianapolis, but he went on then to major in music education at Wayne State University. His goal was to be a high school music teacher, and he trained for that. He was hired to teach in the school system in Detroit as the first black high school teacher, and he there began his career. But as he told us last night, Uncle Sam had other plans, and he was drafted into the Army and began his career with the U.S. Army Band. He had the opportunity then to go on to audition for the U.S. Army Chorus, and that wound up being more to his liking. He sang with the chorus for a number of years, and while he was with that chorus, he had an opportunity to study with a leading opera coach in Washington, D.C. And it was there then that he began to think about the possibility of a career in opera. And this then eventually led to new opportunities. Now, after he did get out of the Army, he went back to Detroit and began to teach here in the high schools. And I just learned a few minutes ago that while he was here as a high school teacher, he had in his classes several singers who later went on to become stars with Motown. And so Detroit is a very rich and vibrant musical city in a whole lot of different genres. So he was convinced to join the Trunau Opera Players in Woodstock, New York, where he debuted as Pinkerton in Madame Butterfly. He then went on to win the Metropolitan Opera auditions in 1961 at the age of 26, and was the first black tenor to receive a contract at that opera company. He, over the next several decades, sang at all of the major opera houses worldwide, and sang about 80 roles in Berlin, Italian cities, Covent Garden, and throughout the United States. In 1961, it must have been an auspicious year, debuted with the New York City Opera, Spoleto, and Met Opera in the role of Ferrando. By the way, if you want a really beautiful example of the singing, I encourage you to listen to the recording of Un'aura Amorosa from Così fan tutte. Just glorious singing, beautiful, warm, rich tone, dramatic power, and most of all, emotional connection. So I love that recording. While he was still an active performer, and as I said, he had a career of many decades, he returned to teaching, and he began teaching young singers at the Aspen Festival, and eventually took a position at the University of Maryland. Since 1987, he's been here at back again in Michigan, and he is the Joseph Edgar Maddie Distinguished University Professor of Voice. In this position, he's influenced generations of young singers through, as we learned last night from his alumni, a combination of setting very high standards, but also supporting their personal growth. Thank you. Evidently, I was not loud enough earlier, so hopefully you can hear me now. Last night's concert featured a variety of testimonials from his former students, and I was really moved by the things they had to say about their studies with him. And he is clearly an educator who influences his students and who keeps on giving in the years after they leave his tutelage. So, George Shirley represents all of the best things that we do in cinema. He is someone who is deeply committed to music in America on a variety of different levels. He is someone who has been a pathbreaker, showing new directions for music, and he also then has been committed to education throughout his career. And so for all of these reasons, it is my pleasure to award you the 2024. We were in the 20th century for quite a while. The 2024 Honorary Member Award. Before I turn the microphone over to him for some remarks, we also have a representative from the Denise Graves Foundation, and she is going to read a letter from Ms. Graves.
I don't think my voice will carry. But, Mr. Shirley, when I told Denise that we were giving this award at this meeting, she was very excited, and she wanted to know how she could contribute and how she could share her congratulations with you. And so I contacted Doug, and he very graciously allowed us to be part of this ceremony today, and we're really happy to do so. I just want to say personally how much I appreciate what you have given to us in terms of your insight, your encouragement, your support for our work in the historical aspect that we're doing with the foundation as we work with singers, getting them into the narrative, doing public-facing musicology so that everybody can share their gifts with all of us. And I also want to say personally how excited I was a number of years ago when you agreed to give us an essay for practice and opera. I still think that's one of the highlights. When Naomi approached you, I was so excited. You know, and that was one of the highlights of that, of many highlights for that publication. But I want to read to you a little bit of what Denise sent to us today. Mr. George Shirley is worthy of this honor, and critical and comprehensive review of his life, career, and work confirms his exemplar. The longtime friendship with Mr. Shirley that I have enjoyed and the consistent support DGF has earned, combined in this short tribute DGF offers today through our Hidden Voices program. Dearest George, we were last together with the throng of supporters at the Metropolitan Opera News Awards a few seasons ago, as industry luminaries came together to laud you. Here a different group of supporters and industry luminaries meet for a similar purpose. Your friends at DGF are so very proud of you. Know that we all join you here today as this honor is bestowed. Sincerely, Denise Graves.
I am indeed truly honored by these recognitions. I believe in giving the credit where credit is due. Yes, I've done things that I didn't plan on doing. They were in the script I was given when I was conceived. And I haven't had an opportunity or a chance of changing anything in that script, the good or the bad. People say, oh yes, but you have authority, you have the right to make decisions. Well, the decisions from my point of view have already been made for me to make. Because a career in opera is something that I didn't plan on. I had my job, as I said last night, I won't go all this, but I had my job, it was given me before I graduated from Wayne. But Uncle Sam came along and interrupted all that. I didn't ask for that, any more than I asked to be born. And I was not happy with having to leave a job that I had for only 1 year and go into the Army. I wasn't joking. There was no joking. I had to do it. And it turned out to be, for me, a turning point in my trajectory, in my professional trajectory. It was in the Army that someone convinced me that you should think about becoming a professional singer. And so I thought about it and I said, well, suppose I go back to Detroit and start teaching again. And I have students that shows career potential. What are you going to tell them about what it's like to be a professional singer? You haven't got the slightest idea what that is. So I decided, okay, I'll give it 2 years. When I told my wife of the decision, she made the second mistake she ever made in her life. When she said, whatever you want to do is all right with me. But it turned out to be what I was born to do. And for that, I'm grateful. People say, yeah, but you've done this, you've done that. I've only done what was in my plan to do. Plan made not by me, but by the intelligence that created life, created me. And for that, I'm grateful. People say, yes, but you have the voice. I said, look, I was implanted with the gift, and that's it. If I hadn't been given also the work ethic to develop that gift, then the gift would have fallen on fallow ground. So I'm grateful. My name starts with G, George, but it means grateful. I'm grateful for this recognition. I thank all of you. I'm grateful to still be here. At this point, that wasn't in my plan, but I'm glad that I am. I look at so many of my colleagues, best friends, people who encouraged me, who are not here because their time came to an end. And although I'm not what I was physically, and all of that 30, 40 years ago, I've been given the drive to continue doing what I've been gifted to do for as long as I can do it. Teaching, I'll teach as long as my students don't complain that Professor Shirley just went to sleep in my I've come close. But I'm grateful that that has not happened. Again, I thank you for this recognition, which I accept on behalf of the reason, the power that is placed in me to receive it. Thank you.
At this point, we'll take 5 minutes to reset the stage, and we'll come back and have a quick summary from the past presidents of our first 50 years. I look forward to that.
Also, the lunch is going to be out until 2, so if you need to get it after that, you can still get a plate of that.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I can tell that we've got a lot of former students and present students in the class because they're all sitting in the back. So please come up here. The best seats are in the front, and I encourage you to move forward if you're willing. We are just about ready to get going, so yeah, find your seat now. Thank you so much. So I was not there when this happened, but 50 years ago, a group of very adventurous and forward-looking people decided that they needed a new scholarly society that would address some of the inequities in the field and would allow for a broader forum for American music. And the result of that is what you see around you this weekend. This has been a 50-year period of lots of innovation by lots of different people. And so it was my thought that one of the best ways to get a sense of our history and commemorate what has happened over the past 50 years would be to talk to the past presidents. And so I've asked Tom Rees to coordinate a group of his fellow past presidents to give us a quick trip down memory lane and tell us how Sam went from that initial thought of a sonic society 50 years ago to what we know today. So at this point, I'll turn this over to Tom Rees.
Thank you all for coming. Is this clear? Am I audible? Yes, I'm audible to me. Okay. Thanks, Doug. Welcome to this special presidential plenary for our society. I can hardly believe that we have reached the half-century mark, that I have reached that century. And I want to thank all of you, especially those of you who are joining or have joined SAM since the pandemic. That in itself deserves special thanks. Also, of course, Doug Baumberger, the Board of Trustees, the Program Committee, the Local Arrangements Committee, and all of the people who've been doing things for us this weekend to put these things in place. I also want to thank Michael Broyles for assembling this wonderful series of pictures. If you haven't yet sat out in front of the registration room and looked at the pictures of about the last 20 years or so, these are really wonderful snapshots. I was having all kinds of flashbacks as I was watching them this morning, so please do that. I also want to thank one of the people who is not here with us today. He is still alive, but not in Detroit. Raul Camus, second president of SAM, put together a short history of the early years of the Sonic Society, as it was called then. And we have copies of that little history for you in various places around the hall. There's some on the table here. Beth Levy has some, and there's some in the back. Please feel free to carry those away, or if they're gone, talk to us and we will make extra copies. It is truly my hope that although we will not have time to touch on all the elements of society, that we will be able to hit the high points, the major challenges, and perhaps some key shifts in direction and perspectives before we launch the further conversations. Of course, this will not be the whole story, and please feel free, by the way, to talk to all of us, including the people on the panel and others who will come up from the audience. There are all sorts of wonderful SAM Sonic stories. I also, before I yield the floor, I'll come back in two other identities. I'm going to read statements from other past presidents, but I want to take a minute to recognize and name some movers and shakers who moved and shook many of us into participation or deeper involvement into or in our field, but who are no longer with us. Our first and third presidents of the Sonic Society, Irving Lowens and Alan Whitten. Two later presidents and personal heroes of mine, Andrew McLucas and Ray Linda Brown. And, excuse me, The crucial, and I would say often hidden figures in Sam's formation, especially our first executive director, Kate Van Winkle Keller, of beloved memory, and a few others who, while not presidents of SAM or otherwise office holders, were presidential in their influence in our scholarship, in service, and in their generosity toward us. To pick up George Shirley's comment about gratitude, which I think is very important. Those figures include Eileen Southern, Charles Ham, Judith McCullough, Adrian Freed Block, Dina Epstein, H. Wiley Hitchcock, Mark Tucker, and Susan Porter, and I'm sure I've left many other names off that list that you may recall. Certainly Marjorie Lawrence, more than just Irving's wife. She was a figure of great delight and amusement. We're all kind of smiling thinking about Marjorie. So for all of our foremothers and forefathers, I would ask us to stand for a memorial moment of silence. These are really important people. I'm feeling I'm getting this to just saying their names. So. Thank you. One further point before turning over the microphone to the group. I want to point out a couple of things that are to underline a couple of things in Raoul's Camus's history here during the first years of the society, which I think have carried forward. The first is that our society was founded to play with, enjoy, explore, talk about, and hold up for examination American music in a way that was friendly, inclusive, and eclectic. And the words high spirits, comradeship, pleasure come to mind. And I hope all of you still feel that way about the society. It was also assumed, I think, that our meetings would be scholarly, but not accompanied by the other adjectives, deadly serious scholarship. And as Raoul points out, the earliest members, and many of the current ones now, again, had a mixed bag of interests and occupations. They were composers, sheet music and musical instrument collectors, museum curators, librarians, as well as performers, professors, and teachers. And with that emphasis, I will invite Dean Root to take over, and I will only return to speak other people's words.
Thank you, Tom. Can you hear me?
No.
It's not on. Push the button.
How can you hear me?
There you go.
Is it all right if I sit? Because we'd like to be a community here, and I don't want to, I'd rather.
Can't hear you. Pull the mic closer.
It's not loud enough back here.
Oh, down.
Let me try this.
Yeah.
I focused on the subtitle of this section, which is 50 Years of Musical Advocacy. And so I wanted to tell you 5 quick memories of musical advocacy and my experience with this organization. I began in the late 1960s as a graduate student in musicology at the University of Illinois. My wife, my now wife, fellow graduate student in ethnomusicology at the time, Doris Dyan, and the associate music librarian at the University of Illinois, Jean Guile, were trying to figure out why the library contained no journals for the fields that we were interested in learning about. I got plenty of contemporary composers. I got lots of other things going on right now in the journals, but there was nothing for our field. And so we formulated an editorial plan, talked talked it over with a few musicologists. Charles Hamm comes to mind, who's mentioned, dear friend, my mentor, but he advised us strongly against trying to create a journal of American music because he wanted us to infuse the American Musicological Society with our research. But we took it to Richard Wentworth, Dick Wentworth, who was the head of the University of Illinois Press, and said, what do you think about this idea? Because you're publishing lots of other interesting journals in other fields. He said, oh, this is a great idea. The problem is, how are we going to pay for it? Oh, we have to come up with the money too? You've got to have a subscription base. You need a scholarly organization that can buy the journal. So we never really rejected, but and Doris and I went off to England to work for a Royal Dictionary. And we got a call one day from Jean Guile, who told us, there's this organization that's just being founded. You've got to hear about it. And we sent in our dues, and we became technically founding members of the Sonneck Society. So, although we weren't there at the first programs, we'll hear more about that, I think, from others, including the notes that you have access to now from Raoul. We were able to be part of planning an idea even before the society had thought of it, because the society didn't exist yet. And so when I told Irving Lowens about this conversation we had had with Dick Wentworth, I gave him the phone number. I said, here, you should talk to this guy. And Irv called him up, and one thing and another, the board liked the idea. Irv flew out to Urbana, Illinois to talk with Dick Wentworth. He came back months later. It felt like far too long for me. I was afraid things had not gone wrong. But he came back with Alan Britton, and they signed the contract. We sat in Jean Guile's living room. We thought, well, what are we going to call this thing? And I was surprised. Irv was a journalist, and he had these longer names that he was trying to be, fine-tune what the contents were. And I said, how about just plain old American music? Just call it American music, because that way it can be more embracing and you don't limit yourself to content. Anyway, one thing and another. They got it signed, the contract signed. Alan began publishing a couple of years later after that. That's one point of advocacy. Another one was when I was elected president in 1989, I asked Katie Keller for the written description of each of the officers' jobs and what each of the committees of the board was assigned to do. Well, there was no such thing. How do we know what their jobs are? How do we know how we're going to function? So we created what's called a handbook, what we call the handbook. We got each of these folks to describe the work of their committee or their office. We hammered it out in board and created what we wanted to have passed on from one holder of that office to the next, so that there could be some continuity in what we did. And then the third thing is, I said, well, what we really need is, we all know what, that we love to be here as part of this organization, but we don't have any vision for the organization itself looking forward. And when I mentioned the term strategic planning, people's eyes blazed. But we did it. We hired an external facilitator. She came in, we worked at, our first meeting was at Kitty's house, Kitty Keller's house. And we created a strategic plan for the society that would drive all the actions and the funding for those actions moving forward. And fourth, one of the challenges when I came in as president was that much of the board was taken up by people who were interested in particular aspects of American music, but not all the rest of it. And they were committees of the board. And they would take up the time of the board to report on what their committee had been doing. Well, it wasn't really a committee. It wasn't a board committee in any case. This was really, and I borrowed the idea from the Music Library Association. We call them interest groups. So we created a set of interest groups for people who could participate in the society through the interest group and therefore grow the society. And then finally, number 5. The society, we often heard, was considered to be a second-rate organization because it wasn't really scholarly. We had all these composers. We had all these performing musicians. We had radio people. We had lots of other people, which I love having in the society. So I wrote a letter to the American Council of Learned Societies. I got permission from the board to write a letter saying, here's why we should be a constituent member of the American Council of Learned Societies. And I was later told, somewhat to the opposition of the American Musicological Society. Because Wiley Hitchcock was the delegate from the AMS at that point. He told me it was a very clever letter. And they approved, and we became constituent member of the ACLS on equal footing at that point with AMS and Society for Ethnomusicology. And later, they were joined by Society for Music Theory. So there's, I think, still 4 major music societies in the ACLS. So those are the 5 points of advocacy that I wanted to focus on that I had fingerprints on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. I'm going to remain standing because the mic is working here. And also, this is where I'm speaking for others. These are two past presidents who could not be with us today, but who wanted for me to send their greetings. The circumstances are simply, logistical and personal. The first is from Jillian Anderson, and we asked for specific responses to specific questions. So that's where this is happening here. And she says in her email to me, the major accomplishments of my tenure, I forget where she was in the presidential order, but she was 6 or 7, 5 or 6, I think. Major accomplishments was the polling of the membership about what should be in a monument of American music. If you were at the SAM session yesterday, you learned much more about this. The results of the survey and subsequent meeting were incorporated into the NEH-sponsored conference that established the successful NEH-AMS co-sponsored MUSA project. It seemed to me, she says, at the time that the project, among many other things, was Rich Crawford's attempt to get the AMS committed to the importance of American music. Given that current meetings of the AMS are dominated by American music papers, some of you have probably given them there, I'd say the result has surpassed his wildest dreams. However, in the meantime, Sam seems to have become more ethnomusicological and thus more dependent on recordings of music and sociology than on actual scores. Talk about that later if you want. The NEH-sponsored conference included an ethnomusicologist as well as musicologists and 2 librarians, and my wish for the future would be to see a balance between musicology and ethnomusicology established and a popular history of American music written that incorporated the MUSA volumes as well as recordings and the sociology of music. After all the effort that went into the MUSA volumes, I hate to see them sit mostly unused, except by a few specialists, like tombstones on library shelves. And if you know Jill, she's remarkably clear. What's that? Exactly, remain standing. The second information comes from Carol Oja. Carol had intended to be here and is really sorry to have been here, have missed, but in any case. Carol says, I was president of SAM from 2003 to 2005, the 10th president and the 4th woman.
Up until the early 1900s, presidents served 4-year terms, so turnover was slow. As to what first attracted me to Sam, that's an easy question to answer. Where have we heard this before? It was the meanness of AMS. See, you all know the history here, right? And Carol was very, deliberative and careful speaker. Where Americanists and women were treated badly. I'm talking about the 1980s, she says, when I was a graduate student, then an emerging academic. My first SAM conference took place in Lawrence, Kansas in 1982. At the time, a core group of scholars from the University of Illinois provided the backbone of an organization that was still emerging. So you see how these stories are interweaving. Along with Dean Root and his wife Doris Stein, those Illinois alums were mostly students of Charles Hamm, Nicholas Temperley, and Bruno Nettle, plus the University of Illinois Music Library. And I'm so glad she mentions that, especially through Donald Crummell and Jean Guile. And Donald Crummell is still alive, is he not?
Yeah.
Absolutely an amazing. And Jean too, yes, and Jean too. Led the way in providing bibliographical resources for studying the US, which well before the arrival of the internet. As for key memories of my time, the name change from Sonic Society to the Society for American Music had already happened in 1999, thanks to the courage of the late Andrew McLucas. Debate about the name change had been fraught, and Anne handled it brilliantly. And I can only say amen to that. Overall, Carol continues, I learned about running an organization of this sort is a bit like a relay race. Major initiatives are enacted by handing the baton from one president to the next. Under my watch, the Center for Black Music Research at Columbia College in Chicago was thriving under the leadership of Samuel Floyd, and we began planning for a joint conference with them, which took place in 2006 in Trinidad, actually. We also began the SAM History Project under the leadership of Denise von Glahn. There were also difficult issues. Sam's relationship with the journal American Music was under stress, and there was a multi-year period of negotiation, then transition, ultimately finalized by Michael Broyles as the president and Ellie Hassama as the journal's editor. JSAM first appeared in 2007, and our field has ended up benefiting from 2 first-rate peer-reviewed publications. Finally, an important moment came in 2005 when, in the midst of a strong national anti-gay movement, we strengthened the language in our site selection policy to read as follows, quote, the society does not discriminate on the basis of race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, or physical disability, and should seek conference sites in which the human rights of all our members are protected. The previous year, same-sex marriage had been legalized in Massachusetts, and there was intense pushback, with 11 states passing constitutional amendments that prohibited same-sex unions. And finally, she says, as for thoughts of the future, I am not so comfortable reading the tea leaves. At a fundamental level, I hope that SAM will continue embracing diversity in the broadest sense of that term, remaining flexible in the face of ever-shifting cultural currents. And with that, with the mention of Denise, I welcome Denise von Glahn.
I am here not as a past president, but as a future one. I served on the board of the Society for American Music from 2002 through 2005, before assuming a number of appointed and elected roles. It was during that time, in September of 2003, the Society, under the leadership of Carol Oja, initiated an oral history project, initially aimed at gathering recollections and materials from our founding members. These were the people who had experienced and understood firsthand the conditions that propelled a group of scholars, organologists, museum specialists, librarians, and 19th and 20th century Americanists to create the Sonneck Society for American Music. Their name honored Oscar G. Sonneck, the musicologist, the head of the music division at the Library of Congress, the bibliographer, and the first editor of the Musical Quarterly, who had seen the value of preserving the nation's music history. Carol asked me to spearhead the project and make sure that the information I gathered would become part of the Society's permanent archive at the Library of Congress. I have done that, and it's there. Starting in fall 2003 and continuing through the next spring, I sent out surveys to members, used their written responses as well as information gathered through phone conversations and in-person interviews to collect recollections about the Society's beginnings. And at the renamed Society for American Music conferences in Cleveland in 2004, in Eugene, Oregon in 2005, and in Chicago in 2006, the History Project sponsored formal sessions where invited panelists shared their memories of the earliest days of the Society with conference attendees. Over those 3 years, we heard from Raoul Camus, Marjorie Morgan Lowens, Dean Root, Cynthia Adams Hoover, Richard Crawford, Wiley Hitchcock, Judith McCullough, Kitty Keller, and Barbara Lambert, and from dozens of folks who stepped up to the microphone in the open Q&A and comments sessions that followed. They were all recorded and became part of the Society's archives as well. And in an utterly spooky bit of serendipity, this morning I got a text from one of those founders, Barbara Lambert, who I have not corresponded with in years. Family health issues have kept me from joining you at this propitious and illustrious event, the 50th Annual Conference of the Society for American Music, ! The evolution of this extraordinary organization is more than we ever imagined at its inception in 1973. I laud and compliment each and every one of you for your many and rich contributions to the study of American music in all its forms and genres, and for coming together in such a conspiracy of helpfulness and support to each other. Kudos to you all who make up the Society of American Music. That's from Barbara Lambert, who was keeper of the instruments at the Boston Fine Arts Museum. At the 2007 Pittsburgh Conference on Friday, March 2nd at 1 o'clock, prior to any excursions, we held an open mic session and invited all those who were interested to share their recollections, impressions, and thoughts regarding the Society. We wanted to know, what brought you to your first conference? What were your first impressions? What were your hopes for the Society for American Music? How did you see yourself in the Society? How did you imagine the Society in 5 years, in 10 years? All members of the Society were encouraged to participate. There was no requirement that one was a founding member or an early member or even a member of particularly long-standing or any kind of office holder. It was come one, come all. We wanted to hear from as many conference attendees as possible. With the help of Sam member and FSU graduate musicology and library science student, Sarah Nodine, the open mic session was audio and video recorded, and all oral history project materials were organized, shipped to the Library of Congress, and a copy made to be kept in the Allen Music Library at Florida State. I am happy to report that as we sit here this moment, those materials are being used. 12 students in my current Music and Institutions course are engaged in archival projects that explore the Society for American Music, as well as materials related to Carnegie Hall, which we have a video archive of. And those Carnegie Hall archives materials were handled by my 2008 Music and Institutions students, and they transcribed hours and hours of interviews with people associated with that organization. Today, the SAM Oral History Project archives and my students' explorations of its contents are being guided by yet another SAM member, who is also an FSU-trained musicologist and music librarian, Elizabeth Uchimura, and she currently serves as the editor, book reviews editor of the Bulletin. I look forward to opportunities to collect and record thinking of a whole new generation of SAM members and conference attendees, and to add to the historical record of this unique American music institution. I want future researchers to be able to trace how a once small group of determined Americanists imagined and nurtured an organization that could flex and grow with an ever-changing and expanding musical culture. And as they consult the record of its history, I want them, like you, to imagine its future.
We have other presidents in the audience, but before they rise, I wanted to make sure we got our most recent distinguished president, because she was involved, most of you know, I'm sure, Tammy Kernodle and what she had to do, but Tammy's going to give us an on-the-spot report of her comings and goings with Sam.
It's a pleasure to be here, but not. When I'm asked to contextualize my presidency, there are different versions of that contextualization that I give according to the audience. But I want to say that if I had to sum it up in music, I would draw on one of my favorite songs by Oleta Adams, "Everything Must Change, and Nothing Stays the Same. Everyone will change." And we definitely changed during my presidency. There are few who know that my presidency and the colorful nature of my presidency did not begin in March of 2020, when the world shut down. It began 5 minutes after the end of the business meeting in New Orleans, as Twitter was already on fire, talking about events that had taken place within the convention that were not necessarily representative of the community that we were. It was at that moment that I questioned a lot. But it was also that moment that I came to understand that I was being called into something that started in 1993 when I came to my first SAM conference as a master's student, as someone uncertain and unsure if she even wanted to stay in musicology because of the meanness and the messiness of AMS. And I came to this society because Susan Cook had told me, after I attended my first AMS and had searched fervently for Eileen Southern, that Eileen Southern would not be at an AMS meeting, and how heartbroken I was about her absence. She told me, there is a space for you. And she began to tell me about SAM. And I came to that conference in 1993, and I stayed. And so in those moments during my presidency, when I wanted to give up and I did not have the answers, and I had many people who were screaming at me about what to do in the wake of a global pandemic, I went back and I talked to young Tammy, who came to SAM in 1993, who sat in the meeting in 1999, when many members of this society, enraged over the changing of the name from Sonneck to Sam, said they would never come back again. And we continued. I went back to the moment that Ellie Husama invited me to be on the editorial board of American Music, only to find myself in the middle of a transition that became J-Sam. I went back to the moment that Sam went to South Carolina in the midst of the conversation about the Confederate flag. And I was the chair of the Cultural Diversity Committee, and I naively asked Sam to pull out of Charleston, not realizing the weight financially and the weight of the reputation of the society in making such a decision. I went back to the moment that Raylinda Brown became the first Black woman to lead this organization. And as I stepped into those footsteps as the second Black woman leading that organization, I thought not about wrestling with the past, but thinking about what was the future. Because in March 2020, when the world stopped, everybody looked at us because we were the organization who was next in line to have their first conference in the midst of a pandemic. And no one knew what to do. But I was blessed to serve with people with wisdom and creativity and stillness of heart and understanding of what needed to be done to ensure the survival of Sam. I was blessed to serve with people who had wisdom, integrity, creativity, and a passion to be able to do what was needed to ensure the survival of Sam. I was blessed to serve with people who had wisdom, integrity, creativity, and a passion to ensure the survival of Sam. But most of all, I had the good sense to listen to them. Many of you all don't know this, but Megan McDonald was beginning her tenure as executive director, so everything was changing. And in the midst of a global pandemic and with people screaming through email and text and Facebook and Twitter, Megan McDonald said to me, wait 24 hours. And 24 hours meant the difference between this society losing thousands of dollars and financially probably losing itself, and us being able last year to have our first on-the-ground conference in Minneapolis. In those boardroom meetings, there were women and men who came together and said, we're going to launch a virtual conference with nothing. We not only launched a conference, we had one of the highest attendance during that virtual conference. Our conference was so successful that other organizations reached out to the two women who conceptualized that whole platform, the three women who conceptualized the whole platform and structure of that conference, to ask them, how did you do it? Not only did Sam come out of that situation better, we attracted people who had never been to SAM, who could never afford to come to SAM. Some of you I met last year in Minneapolis. We did it all in a way that made it affordable. And so when I look at my presidency, it's not about me. I had the pleasure of serving. The greatest gift that you can give is your service. The greatest offering you can give is the humility of knowing it is not about you, but it's about being in the right spaces with the right people to do the right things for the right time. We asked some important questions during my presidency. What would a post-pandemic 21st century professional society look like, act like, and operate like? Those questions are still being asked. Those answers are not always clear. But what I know is this: if we remember this history, if we hold fast to the lessons that we have learned in this pandemic, if we value the gift of life and chance that we who remain here have been given, we will not only fulfill the early mission of these founders, but we will chart a course that could potentially change our world. How we live in that world and how our difference is embraced. And so I was thankful to serve, and I continue to be thankful. And I wish our future president that your steps will be ordered, that a vision will be made clear, but that most of all, that those who care will continue to speak and elevate the name of SAM and remind those of the passion in the community and the commitment to service that this organization represents. Thank you.
Thank you for preaching, Sister Tammy. We love you, we love you, we love you. This is a really hard act to follow, and there are some others who may want to speak. I know they have their piece. They can choose or not to come. We still have a few minutes left in this session. And Kitty, I know Kitty Preston never is daunted by a challenge. So please come on.
Wow, that was hard. This is hard to follow. Tammy, bravo. Before I start, I just want to point out, I'm sitting here listening to all these names, and I remember being a young student in the AMS and hearing about the prizes and not knowing any of those names, and I know all the names, and that's sobering, and yet it's bringing it all back. I mean, all these people who come before us and all they've done. In any case, I wish to speak to two pivotal moments in the history of the society, one or both of which probably predate the membership of many of you. The first has to do with our name. We've heard allusions to this, but I want to tell you the story. And I wasn't president, I was secretary. The society was established in 1974 in honor of the path-breaking scholar Oscar Sonneck. By the early 1990s, however, it was clear to those of us who were working to increase membership that the name was an impediment, since it always had to be explained and did not clearly describe the purpose of the society. This was a fraught decision, however, for there was serious, sometimes vehement opposition, especially by charter members, as we just heard from Tammy. By the late 90s, however, it was clear to many that the change was inevitable. The questions were when and how. Because the Society planned to participate in the so-called Millennial or Mega Conference in Toronto in 2000, a joint meeting of 20 music scholarly societies, which was, oh my God, don't ask about it. I was on the planning committee. It made sense to change the name beforehand. So President Andrew McLucas, my good friend, my lamented friend, raised the issue at the November 1998 board meeting. We discussed this at some length, and Raylinda Brown, president-elect, pointed out that although she was very much in favor of this, she was concerned that such momentous change would occur in the first year of her presidency as the first Black president of this society. And she pointed out that it would be better to have happen then, in Ann's presidency. The board agreed and voted to submit to the membership the change to our corporate name. Under our bylaws, this had to be voted on by the membership at an annual business meeting, but information about the change and comments for and against it were sent to the entire membership. The resulting straw poll was a dead heat. At the next conference in Fort Worth in 1999, a major portion of the business meeting was devoted to a discussion of the issue. It was lengthy, thorough, impassioned, but civil, brilliantly moderated by President McLucas. At its conclusion, paper ballots were distributed, votes were counted, and the results announced. The motion passed overwhelmingly, 3-1. But there was no wild cheering. For those of us who supported the change knew there were many who vehemently opposed it, and we had fences to mend. In reality, we were all exhausted. But it was a necessary change and has helped the Society for American Music to flourish. We owe a lot to Ann McLucas and to Raylinda Brown for effecting that change. My second pivotal moments took place some 10 years later at the 2010 conference in Ottawa. President Tom Rees held a lunch for all the former presidents of the Society. I was president-elect, and we all sat around and talked about how we liked Sam, but also about how to react to our changed circumstances. For by 2010, our original goal to make the study of American music a viable part of the scholarly discourse had been achieved. Even the AMS had seen the light, and those younger people in this audience had no idea what it was like to go to an AMS meeting in the 80s and early 70s for that matter. Where was I? Sam was now at a turning point. What do we do? The lunch group proposed that we solicit information from members about their sense of our future direction. We wanted this survey to happen as soon as possible in order to hit the ground running by the next meeting in Cincinnati in spring 2011. So in fall 2010, the Long Range Planning Committee and the Executive Committee held a retreat and produced a new long range plan, a revised mission statement, and the survey, which ran in February. We were on a roll. Fully 1/3 of the membership responded, and the results were clear. SAM members loved the Society, did not believe that we had outlived our usefulness, and wanted overwhelmingly more support for scholarship. We, the board, had our marching orders. The interest in increasing financial support meant that we needed a fully operational development committee. As a board member and secretary, I had watched various iterations of that committee talk about raising money for 20 years, but never actually raise any money. As a result, one of my goals as incoming president was to launch a campaign. And since members had spoken, we needed to make it happen. So at the Cincinnati meeting, Tom, who was outgoing president, and I, as incoming president, conferred about chairs for a possible campaign. But it wasn't until the next board meeting in fall 2011 that the two of us, over lunch, I can picture it, came up with the name, Bruce McLeod, who had submitted an astonishingly thorough report on the Cincinnati meeting as local arrangements chair. I mean, it blew everybody out of the water. This turned out to be a brilliant choice, and I'm not taking credit for it. It was brilliant. Because Bruce agreed to run the campaign if the board gave the committee $10,000, which they agreed to do with much trepidation. So then we have a development committee which turned into a campaign committee. We all met in person in Atlanta in January 2012, created the name SAM 2.0, designed a brochure for the silent phase, and we're off and running. The year-long silent phase was successful. The official public launch of the campaign occurred in the conference in Little Rock in 2023. The campaign ran for 4 years under 3 presidents, myself, Judy Tsao, and Chuck Garrett. At the national conference in Boston in 2016, Bruce announced the completion of a successful campaign. 6 years after noticing a turning point for the society, 5 years after the inspired decision to tap Bruce McClung as chair, and after 5 years of much hard work by the committee, we had raised $1 million. That changed the society. Thank you.
This is the Oscar Who shirt that Raoul refers to in his history of the. Okay. This was actually done as a fundraiser for the students at William and Mary. I want to talk to you about something that happened right after our first conference, which was an unexpected success. In spite of the logistics we endured during the announced bankruptcy of New York City and Gerald Ford's famous drop dead. The society was still in its infancy, and there was no guarantee that it would survive beyond that first year. We were about 100 members at the end of the first year, but nobody was sure that people would renew. And indeed, by the end of the first year, only about 60 people renewed, so it didn't look terribly good. How many members would come to the second conference? Arthur Schrader invited the society to Williamsburg for our second meeting, and it was an innovative meeting historically, introducing the silent auction. But attendance was very small, less than 40 people. Irving, who you've heard about, had some concerns that the organization would not be viable, and so there was a scramble to have the 1978 conference at a venue that would attract more people. An invitation from the University of Michigan was most welcome. And from that point on, the Sonneck Society continued to grow, especially as it expanded westward. And that was important because we were an East Coast society. And first we got to Lawrence in 1982, to Boulder, Colorado in 1986, and California in 1993. And for each of those conferences, there was a concern that nobody would come. Although we had an organizational structure, it was still finding its way. So after the first conference, I was elected in Williamsburg to be a member at large, and Irving decided we needed a fall board meeting. It was decided that it would take place in New York City, which was convenient for most of the board, and that we would meet at my house. I don't remember why my house was chosen. We had 2 small children. I was a new member, but we were there. It was scheduled for a weekend in October, and we and the Camuses put up all the out-of-towners. The meeting with 8 or 9 members of the board in attendance, including Nick Towler, who hasn't been mentioned here, started on Friday afternoon at 1 p.m. We must have had a lot to discuss. After dinner, which Roberta made, we continued to talk. Meeting continued all day Saturday, with breaks for lunch and dinner, again hosted by us. But Irving wasn't finished. He suggested that those who could stay should meet Sunday morning to finish our business. And so we did. And I estimate that the meeting clocked in at about 19 hours altogether. And you might ask, why was the meeting so long? Well, one reason for its inordinate length is due to Irving's chairing of the meeting. He had the ability to start talking about a topic and then soliciting comments from everyone on the board, which would take 45 minutes to an hour. And then when that was done, he would ask somebody to make a motion so that we could discuss what we had just discussed. And we did it for another 45 minutes. So everything was inordinately long. Thankfully, the society grew and board meetings became more structured and its business was completed within rational time limits. After Irving's 6-year tenure, those of us who followed tried to adhere more closely to Robert's rules.
I'm liking this chronological juxtaposition going back and forth. Thank you, John. That was lovely. And Michael Broyles is sort of our last pre-designated speaker, but I also want to say this is going to time out quite well. I'm so happy. But if there are other questions, I forgot to mention that you could pass questions forward on a piece of paper. Is Josh here? He's probably, he is here. Or rather than just go on indefinitely, we're officially scheduled to go until 1:15. Is that correct? Yeah. But we can overlap a little bit, maybe. Well, we won't. Okay. You'll get your lunch. You know, if you want, you have time for that. So without my talking anymore, Michael.
I should introduce myself. I'm the staff photographer. I would like to begin with 2 really short vignettes that I think, excuse me just a second here, illustrate to me the spirit of Sam and why it has succeeded. The first has to do with my introduction to Sam. I had been toiling in the throes of Beethoven scholarship, and I felt I had gone just about as far as I cared to go with that. I began to look into American music, and several people said to me, you must get involved with the Sonneck Society, of course, as it was called. I knew little about it, but decided to investigate. And fortuitously, it was meeting in Philadelphia, and I lived in Baltimore at the time. So one afternoon, I drove up to see what it was all about. As I arrived, Marjorie Lowens was preparing to give a paper on Welsh music in America. How did she begin? She began by passing out cookies she had made from a Welsh recipe. My first overwhelming thought was, this is not the American Musicological Society. This is a different tone. The second vignette has to do with the first paper I gave at Sam. I was then young and unknown, and my paper was going to challenge some of the received wisdom about American music in the 19th century, or in the early 19th century. Wiley Hitchcock was sitting in the second row. He's been mentioned before. I had never met him, but this impressive man with his square jaw looked formidable. Anybody that knows Wiley knows what I'm talking about. There was a lot of discussion after the paper, and finally Wiley stood up to say something. I thought, uh-oh, here it comes. Wiley simply commented, there has been a lot of research since I wrote my book, and not even I agree with everything that I said. Then he sat down. That magnanimity, I believe, remains a part of what makes Sam what it still is. I would like now to move to one of the most important, in fact, I believe the most important issue of my presidency. Sam was not in good financial shape at the time, and this was well before Sam 2.0. And we were also having problems with our journal. I won't go into all those details, but the contract was up for renewal, and it seemed prudent to do some comparison shopping. We discovered, among other things, that we were not receiving any royalties, unlike every other scholarly journal in our field. We also discovered that the original contract, in its ambiguity, seemed to grant the publisher ownership of the journal. Other than a nasty court fight, which of course none of us on either side wanted, our only recourse was to start a new journal. And that began a relationship with Cambridge University Press, resulting in the birth of JSAM. American Musical Scholarship was booming at the time, and there was clearly room for true journals, as there still is. Royalties from Cambridge also did much to put SAM on a sounder financial footing. I'm not sure everybody knows about that or knew about that. And just how good was JSAM? The first article in the first issue of the first volume was named by the American Musicological Society the best scholarly article written that year. By the way, that was by Chris Reynolds. I want to add, however, that it was not just me, but two other people that were very important in making the new journal happen. The first is Susan Key, who chaired the committee investigating the journal situation and did yeoman's work to bring it about. The second one was Ellie Hassama, who has been mentioned as the first editor, made those first volumes appear. And we owe both of them a vote of thanks. Finally, I'll make this brief. I just want to say, with the digital world as it is today, something I strongly support. I know that change is coming to journals as to everything else. I don't have a clue as to what will happen, on what journals will look like in the future. That question, however, is not for my generation to answer, but for the next generation to determine. I simply wish Sam and Cambridge, Cambridge University Press, a long and mutually beneficial relationship. I am grateful for the role that JSAM has played so far and believe it can continue to be an important part of our institution. And personally, I am very thankful for having been able to contribute something to SAM. It has meant much to me, and I hope it means and continues to mean much for everyone. Thank you.
I just wanted to say three quick things. The thing I'm most proud about being a Society for American Music president is to be among such amazing company, and also the biggest accomplishment was to get the Walter McClary Fellowship happening. That was the biggest thing for me. Wanted to comment and just say that the two things I hope that SAM continues. Tammy mentioned this very powerfully. Daniel Goldmark would say the same thing if you were here with me. The most important thing I think that we can all help SAM do forever is to support our students and to be kind to our students. And that's the reason Daniel and I came to this conference. That's the reason we stayed here. That's the reason we served as presidents. That's what we try to do every time we come. We try to be kind to students. And that's the biggest thing that we can do to make SAM stay like SAM. And then the second biggest thing, no one has, like this is the best thing about our conference. No one's mentioned it. I have no idea how it happened. Friday afternoons. That is the best, right? So take advantage of the city to find out about local music making. In this conference, go to the Motown Museum. Last conference, go to Paisley Park. I mean, just ridiculous, nice, local commitment, and that's the way that I've met everybody that I know and love here. I think that, I hope that continues also, in addition to the student support. But I would put the Friday afternoon a little bit higher.
Thank you, Chuck. I couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, I didn't say it better myself. And that ends our session. Thank you all for attending. And again, if you want copies of Raul's history, we have them. Beth is over there. There's a stack here. And please, again, invite you to talk to anybody who looks like a past president. Thank you all for coming. You have a wonderful time.
know. I try to smile when I come up to it, otherwise I would